Yeah, I'm speaking about predominantly about older people with whom I work. I mean, my own status as an age peer comes into this, but it's not the centre of what I'm going to be talking about. And I'm not talking about life in relation to either really formal education institutions or even informal ones. But basically, I'm going to be saying that the organisation I'm talking about is a source of informal learning. So this is in the course of making a film about the situation with road crossings. We're just off the A5 there in Kilburn in West Camden. And as you can see, me and Margaret Gibbs are halfway across a road. And if you look above Margaret's head, you can see that the human figure has already gone to red, and she's only halfway across the street, having set off on the timed crossing. So that's the kind of stuff that the organisation I'm referencing here is involved in doing. So it's a world, I'm saying, it's a distance from a lot of what we've spoken about today. Unfunded peer support action groups might do. So Cove is a small association of older people. It doesn't have much in the way of staff. And for 20 years, it's had a concern with open space and the street environment. So the two things I'm going to illustrate are about estate maintenance and the possible delivery of better public toilet provision. I've got one or two things to say very briefly about the learning involved in doing this kind of stuff. And I don't really think the people I'm working with, the issue is not cognitive decline. It's more to do with a world of unfamiliar systems and unwelcome assumptions. And the way I'm treating learning here is not as it's often represented in relation to later life by, say, U3A and others. I'm not talking about social opportunities, well-being, or feeling good. If we want to be effective, active citizens, we have to learn purposefully. I'm going to refer to a manifesto shortly. It has 5 points. Once a week, I have to remind myself what those 5 points are. Yeah, I have to learn them all over again. Yeah, they're not embedded. They're not stuck with me as they might have been when I was 25. And then, you know, to some extent, I'll comment a little on my role in a sort of Quaker position of collaborative leadership. I've recently had to learn how to develop an online survey so that my fellow researchers can survey the condition of public toilets on a phone or a tablet. And that's taken me about 4 months. Don't use SurveyMonkey. Don't get stuck with Adobe Acrobat. Just stick with Google Forms and Google Sheets. That's my main pedagogic intervention for today. A lot of the other stuff is where I'm trying to help share what I know and instruct other people. A lot of that is what is increasingly commonly called executive function, I think. It's just how to organize a group of people to think together. Yeah, there's minimal opportunities for training. Yeah, just, you know, if we do a Zoom call, there's always 3 members who can't get on the call, etc. And then the big one is getting people interested in data, and not only as information, but to actually use it as an audit. A lot of the people I'm working with just want, once they've located where the toilets are, yeah, that's the information to pass on. Fair enough, that's what the Great British Public Toilet Map does. But audit is when you can say to the council, this toilet is not being managed. Nobody has visited to inspect it, yeah? Or why are the doors off? When are you going to put them back? And that's the kind of stuff that in the end, I think we're looking at in terms of motivation to learn. I did introduce in my abstract these 3 propositions, and in preparing the actual presentation, they've turned out to be something somewhere between a millstone and an albatross. I'm not really going to say anything about that first point, that interest in later life learning is largely an outcome of growing older. It's affecting, I think, very strongly the way that educational gerontology is shrinking. There simply aren't people coming through who, whether they're doing undergraduate qualifications or masters, are thinking very hard about what it'll be like to learn when you're 15 years older than I am. And there's something just quite understandable about that. Whereas I think inspiring people of my age and older to see this as our world and something we've got to help take control of is really quite important. Purposeful learning, waking up the following morning, remembering what you learned the previous day, gets harder as you enter later life. I've sort of used as my reference point a book from a very upbeat, rather aspirational neuroscientist, Daniel Levitin, The Changing Mind, a Neuroscientist's Guide to Aging Well. And he's pretty clear that you have to put more effort into it to learn something. Now, there is a whole strand of research in neuroscience and cognitive psychology that screens for age against history and so other social conditions. I don't find that very useful. The phenomenology is, as far as I'm concerned, is getting more difficult. And then finally, in acknowledging that, I'm saying the opposite of what a lot of people say on platforms these days. I'm in a way trying to out the fact that I find it more difficult, because of the risk and exposure. I mean, there's two sorts of risk. One is that people say, oh, no, you're not, you're wonderful, etc. And the other is that they'll be embarrassed and really won't want to accept it. So what various figures, including Tom Schuller, have called fourth age citizenship, the kind of citizenship that you're going to need when you're moving into a nursing home where the rest of the world thinks all you need is care. That, it seems to me, is something we need to bring within the scope of learning and what we understand to be adult education. So very quickly, Kilmarnock Voices Exchange, very small charity, running into problems 4 or 5 years ago when the active members were looking more and more to the overstretched part-time coordinator to pull everything together. So I took on a bit of work, working with a small group of people to encourage them to report nuisance and neglect on streets and estates, using the council's own systems, not phoning up and getting no answer, or badgering your elected member, your councillor in the street, which virtually never achieves anything in relation to a specific problem. But people were very reluctant. They didn't like the digital interface. They clearly felt that they were much more comfortable talking to each other about it than actually getting on the phone. So the tendency was to channel the sort of concern towards me. And so people were having this sort of underlying cautiousness, I think, about the value of their own agency. And in a broad view of education, learning and teaching, that's something we have to continue to support people to try and change. So there was, however, one success. So I'm introducing my good colleague, Linda Stewart. Linda lives on a small council estate, 200 flats, right on the edge of Kilburn High Road in one of the poorest wards in Camden. It's in one of the 6 most deprived in England. The estate, it's socially very fragmented, which I haven't put down, but, fly tripping, drugs, defecation. And what Linda and I did for a year was she took on the work. She chased up everybody in the council. She emailed, she made phone calls. She copied me into all her emails. And so my job was to carry out a kind of continuous mapping analysis of where the services and the contracts seemed to be, so that she could push up the hierarchies and try and get responses to problems that were, huge heaps of rubbish left by builders 10 years before on land that the council claimed, was somehow neutral, a non-space where it didn't matter. We made a short film of some of her work. And in the background to this was the whole question of this estate having lost its active tenants association. And at the end of a year or so, Linda came to terms with the idea that they needed to restore the tenants association. And she managed to get 15 people to an AGM, which was the proportion needed. And that's almost her biggest struggle every year, how to get 15 of her fellow tenants into a room to elect or re-elect quite an active committee. So that gap between the people who you might call activists and their neighbours is a sort of persistent problem. And one of the biggest learning areas that I'm afraid I haven't got any inspirational suggestions about in this presentation. That's just outside Linda's flat. She's holding one of her social meetings where Neighbours of various ages just drop by on a Sunday afternoon. She puts out soft drinks and they all chat for an hour or two. Not quite in the photograph because I was concerned, well, this is a different photographer to me, but you can see the sandaled feet of what turns out to be a child under 13. There is a little posse of kids who turn up on their bikes and like to hang out at these events along with the dogs. They're very fascinated by what the old people are up to. Now, having done this sort of impressive piece of work on our own estate, Linda and I got into a conversation about how to restore Cove's interest in improving public toilet provision in Kilburn. Now, this is the Camden side of the road. If you know Kilburn High Road, it's a famous centre of Irish settlement in London, and the more better recognised parts of Kilburn are in Brent. But Camden is equal, you know, the populations are in fact very similar, and a narrow strip of Camden is there. Toilets, well, they're not a statutory responsibility for local authorities. The rate of closures has increased since 2008, 2010. Everybody's encouraged to think, oh, you just go into Costa and buy a coffee and then you can use the toilet. The community toilet schemes, which feature in various parts of the country, are not universal, and some of them are not well implemented. But there's a growing demand. I mean, in London, the population in London was not aging for many years, but it has started to, and it's started to super age as well. People over 85, the numbers are going up, and the proportion of the older population is going up relative to everyone else. There are certain groups, high-risk groups, people with Crohn's disease, for whom access to toilets in public space is essential. And some older people, some statistics suggest it's really something like anywhere between sort of 10 and 15% of us engage in risky behaviour. We don't drink before going out. We don't take medication. Or we just don't go out because the embarrassment of finding, you know, going somewhere where you don't know what the facilities are like, you don't know whether there's anybody there, whether there are any there, is something that inhibits you. And this is an issue that politically sees high levels of complaint, but not much organised action. So over the last year or two, I'm not going to go into the detail of this. I've been involved with people in different parts of London, and we put together something called the Toilet Manifesto for London group. It has the support of Age UK London, and crucially of the Public Toilets Research Unit at the Royal College of Art. So we put a manifesto together. We did it about 6 months before the recent mayoral elections, and I have to say it's had quite an impact. The bottom line there, London's older citizens and campaigners should monitor and scrutinise provision and identify neighbourhoods in need of investment. We have to just kind of accept that the public bodies are not going to do this. Yeah, they're inhibited by the cost of running a toilet. Toilets are not cheap. Yeah, so they don't really want to find the problems. We're going to have to get in there, pull them out, and force them to face up to it. So, yeah, so it's a data gathering for audit approach. Now, my goodness, that really is quite difficult. It's not easy to persuade people to do it, but the rewards have been very clear. 2 or 3 councils to whom we've challenged about the information on their website have already put an officer on to updating it and reorganising it. I'm not sure they've got their information routines as well, in their inspection routines as well as they should do. But this kind of stuff does make a difference. So it's worth learning how to do it well. But it's not clear as yet, I mentioned this earlier, that many activists actually want to learn the 5 points of the manifesto so that they can explain the case. Every street preacher can generally give you, you know, verses from St. John or the Book of Kings or whatever it is. They can be extraordinarily referenced. Yeah, we don't tend to do that now in terms of social campaigning. We're all too ready to come up with anecdote, personal experience. That's vivid, it's important, but you've also got to have the background stuff in place. I haven't as yet worked on the kind of training or seminars that we'll need to implement that. So Linda has basically sort of tackled, you know, we've agreed to tackle the situation on Kilburn High Road. We've got a volunteer survey team. There are 9 people involved with that. I've had to produce this online survey tool, which has been extremely complicated. And at the end of this month, we've got what we call a Kilburn debate. Joanne Bichard, the professor at Royal College of Art, is coming, and we've got the deputy leader of Camden Council coming to reply. So although we still haven't actually done the survey, and I don't really know how well it is going to assemble the data, we've put our bets up in advance. We see this as it's going to make a difference, and we'll make a new film. So that was a protest last November. Everybody's standing on the site of what was a public toilet on Victoria Road, just off Kilburn High Road. Everyone's masked, and the light was bad, but they've all got their thumbs down to show how much we disapprove of this lost toilet. So the challenges are the ones you'd expect. I'm conscious of the time. Where's the learning? If we can put this back into, in relation, I'm not really going to go through these now, but the purposeful learning becomes harder as we enter later life, and committed learning involves risk and exposure. Basically, I'm coming back to Linda's on the ground in Kilburn. I'm shielding at the moment in Wood Green on the other side of North London, so I'm not directly involved. The learning really for Linda and I is about retaining the interest and loyalty of the team, the practicalities of supporting people to work together, because we've basically said it's no good got one person going with a phone, there needs to be two. I've got to find an adequate format to maintain the online systems, because as we start to generate data, I suddenly realize I don't really know what to do with this stuff on Google Sheets. It's very different from the ways I've put together data in the past. The reason we're doing it, though, is you can't say how much faster it is. The moment a report comes in from somebody on the phone, it's ready, analysed in columns on a sheet. It's quite sort of been shocking for me to see how powerful these quantification data systems are. And then we've got to work out a way of developing good presentation systems, facilitate discussion of the recommendations. We have to keep bringing the volunteer team together. Then there's the whole question of how to use this information effectively with officers. And we've got to convince the public around us this is not number one as an issue for people in Kilburn. Public are sympathetic, but not necessarily ready to line up behind you. And Linda's got that interesting job about motivating people to contribute effectively on film. And somewhere in this is a whole mix of things about how we manage our fear of learning. A fear of finding of learning these tools, which will show that the world can be understood in a way that is different to what we used to. I can value as wisdom or experience as much as I like, but so much stuff now runs in a way that is completely different from the assumptions that I regarded as normative 30, 40, 50 years ago. I have to tackle that. There's no point sitting on the sidelines and leaving it to younger people. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Great presentation, and loads of really interesting questions for us to think about as well, I think, in the discussion groups.